Welcome to When Football Began Again, the podcast that takes a nostalgic look at the Premier League era. Hello and welcome to a slightly delayed episode 12 of When Football Began Again, the podcast that takes a nostalgic look at the Premier League era and also enjoys a bank holiday from time to time. Joining me on this week's show is comedian and Swansea City fan Simon Emanuel. Simon is a very funny man. He has been a Swansea fan his entire life. He has watched them from the brink of extinction all the way up the league ladder into the Premier League, to be victorious at Wembley, into European football. It's one hell of a ride that Swansea City have given their fans over the last couple of decades, and we touch on quite a lot of that with Simon as he chooses his deserted island matches, the games that he would take to a desert island with him and a player, and one or two other memorable matches. All of that coming up very shortly. A huge thank you, as always, to everybody who listened to last week's show about 1994-95. Seems that's a season that is close to lots of people's hearts, as it is to mine. I have a 95-96 season coming up in a few weeks. I actually recorded that earlier this week with Tony Jameson, fantastic comedian and football manager streamer, very knowledgeable football fan, and some really, really good chat with him. And also Phil Walker, a brilliant comedian, a headline comedian all over the country, son of Roy Walker, catchphrases Roy Walker. Phil said that he would describe me as a modern day Stato. I am taking that all day long. What a compliment. However, pride does come before a fall. I have had some feedback about last week's show, a potential correction to last week's show, and if so, I have to make an apology. Steve Davis, the story of the West Ham fan plucked from the stands by Harry Redknapp at a pre-season friendly to score a goal for West Ham and then have it chalked off due to being offside. Apparently the goal stood. Steve did score for West Ham. It only adds to this urban legend, of which there are many versions around. But from a pretty good source, I think it may be correct. Steve Davis, plucked from the stands, scored for West Ham United. Steve, if you're out there, mate, I'd love to chat to you and find out your side of the story. Tune in at the end of today's show to find out who you voted as the Premier League's greatest Barbadian. It was another landslide this time. I will reveal all at the end of the show. In this show, Simon helps me pick the Premier League's greatest Australian. Slightly tougher competition, perhaps, than Barbadians for the Aussies in the Premier League era. That will be available on Twitter for you to go and vote and have your say as soon as this show is available. So go and find that at WFBA Pod on Twitter, and the poll should be up there. But without further ado, we are going to get straight into Simon's deserted island matches. A couple of notes here just for any references. This was recorded during the World Cup, so about 3-4 months ago, at which point Swansea were making a pretty concerted effort to reach the playoffs for a shot to get back into the Premier League. That hasn't quite materialised at the time of recording, just in case anything in there sounds a bit odd about us talking about Swansea's chances of returning to the Premier League. Unfortunately, that does not look like it'll be happening this season. Let's crack on. Simon Emanuel, deserted island matches. Enjoy. Joining us today to discuss their deserted island matches is comedian and Swansea City fan Simon Emanuel. Welcome, Simon. How you doing, mate?
Yeah, really good, mate. I'm looking forward to this. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. Yeah, digging a little bit deeper into Swansea's Premier League history and the matches you're going to take with you. We're going to send Simon off to a deserted island with a TV screen, a VHS player, a copy of 6 different football matches. We're also going to give him the opportunity to select a current or former Premier League player to attempt a rescue mission, a football to practice recreating his favourite goal with, and the opportunity to banish 90 minutes he'd rather forget into Room 101 forever. Simon, we're going to come on to the games that you take with you to your deserted island very soon. When did you start going to Swansea? Can you remember your first match?
I was so young. I remember I had a bit of a mad introduction to Swansea because my dad, he was a nutter. He was one of the football hooligans down who used to stand with all the other hooligans on the North Bank. and he thought it was perfectly acceptable to take me as a child to be with him watching from there. So there were times where there'd be like a pitch invasion, and I'd have to stand and wait for my dad to come back off the pitch. It was insane. I think I was maybe 7 or 8 years old. It was. I can't remember who we played in the first match, but I'll never forget the feeling of the electricity that the Vetch Field used to have. It was crazy there.
Famous old ground that Swansea left behind a few years ago now, but lots of fond memories, I'm sure, for the fans. And that sounds like quite the experience. Is this the kind of thing then when you got back to school telling your mates about on the playground, like, or were they also in the stands?
Man, I was the coolest kid in school because of this, because other kids from school would be somewhere around that area, but they'd always see me right at the back with all the hooligans, and they loved it. They thought it was the best thing in the world.
Brilliant. Well, that's a reputation that's going to see you all the way through year 4, isn't it? That's brilliant.
Yeah.
So the first match for you to choose is a Premier League game involving the Swans. What have you gone for and why?
It was in 2017. We had Paul Clement as our manager. His first game in charge, we were bottom of the league, and we went to Liverpool and we beat them 3-2. Incredible.
You know, the new manager bounce sort of thing of going to Anfield, and that's a pretty decent Liverpool side in 2017 as well, wasn't it? They've had a couple of fallow periods, but that was
they had a great side. We were going there expecting to get absolutely battered at the time. We were rock bottom of the league. He took over from Bob Bradley, which was one of the most disastrous managers we'd ever had there. We'll probably talk more about him later. He was terrible. But what happened then after that game, it was the confidence and obviously the tactics from Clements as well. And we went on a run, and I think we finished 15th that season. So we were well out of the relegation by the time the season ended. I think if we had got battered in that match, it could have been a different story that season.
And was it, with Clements coming in, and as you mentioned, Bob Bradley in that era obviously was a difficult period. I mean, was it just, night and day, the difference that you saw in the team? Because Clements had that reputation and has that reputation for getting the ball down, playing really good football, which Swansea obviously brought to the Premier League as well. So was it almost like a return to that?
Oh, mate, it was, the difference was astounding. I'm not exaggerating when I say under Bob Bradley, it didn't look like we had any tactics. Never mind the tactics when you keep the ball down and pass. It didn't look like we had any at all. And all of a sudden, Paul Clement comes in. The first thing you realise is the players are playing in the correct positions. It was that bad under Bradley. So it was such a massive uplift. And all of a sudden, players like Leon Britton, who under Bradley didn't look up to much, and all of a sudden he's back to himself. He's, they used to call him the Welsh Chabby. It was just unbelievable. That one game gave us hope, because all of a sudden we were Swansea again.
Going back a few years before that, Swansea's rise to the Premier League, it was astonishing, not least because you were 90 minutes away from being relegated to the Conference in 2003. You beat Hull 4-2 in a match you were 2-1 down in at one point, which relegated Exeter. It actually took them half a decade to get back into the Football League. By the time they were back in the Football League, Swansea were in the Championship. So how much of a sliding doors moment was that afternoon, not going into the Conference?
Oh, it was massive, and there was so much that could have gone wrong that day, because we went a goal down. We had, at that time, on loan from Blackburn, James Thomas, who scored the hat-trick on that day. He was a Swansea boy. He actually later became a postman in Swansea, so he lives back in Swansea now. Whoever made the decision to bring him in on loan when they did, that was our sliding doors, because if he hadn't been there that day, I don't think the club would have existed. Like, not only would we have gone down and not come back up, we probably would have gone under, because financially at that time, we were struggling. That was round about the era where we'd been bought for £1 a couple of months before, so we were in trouble.
Also, the kind of thing that you don't get now that Swansea are kind of in the higher reaches of the Football League ladder, that players retire and become a postie. I mean, I imagine he's the local sort of the Jimmy Glass character, remembered for life and never have to buy another pint in Swansea. Is that fair? Yeah,
well, at one point we had a striker called John Williams, and his nickname was the Flying Postman, because he was also a part-time postman. He was playing for the club and he was the postman. This is why I love the lower league. Like, Premier League experience was great, and the new stadium's lovely, but I do think you lose so much magic that when you go up the divisions, that lower league football is something special there.
And this podcast being about the Premier League, that's one of the things we really want to kind of touch on and explore, because actually, and we'll probably come to this a little bit in a little while, in terms of, which is better? Obviously, the Premier League is glitz and glamour and lots of money, but actually, that lower league, down the Football League ladder, the stories, the characters. As a Swansea fan, you've literally seen both sides.
Yeah.
So the second match for Deserted Island is a non-Premier League Swansea game. So any Swansea game from outside the top flight, obviously there's a few to choose from. What have you gone for?
I've gone for, it's 1999. We beat Rotherham 2-0 at the Vetch Field. Now, the reason I've gone for this, there was no great significance in that result, but in that game, my favourite Swans player of all time made his debut. We had a Jamaican striker called Walter Boyd, who had absolutely no right to be with a third division side. He was playing in the World Cup the year before for Jamaica in 1998. He was one of the best players they had. Somehow, we'd got him on a free transfer, and I've never seen magic like that. So he started the game, and all of us, you can tell, he's miles above the rest. Like he's playing passes that no one's making the run for. He's so far advanced on that game. At one point, he's kicked the ball into the crowd in frustration because no one's made the run for him. And he scored 2 on that debut. The first was a reaction goal, hit the post. He comes back in a rebound. And the second one was one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen at the Vetch Field. This little ball over the top. He's brought it down on his heel with one touch and just chipped the keeper before even looking. And it was, at that moment, I was like, I've fallen in love. This is my new favourite striker. And he was insane. Like he would, because he's from Jamaica, there were some games he'd refuse to come on because it was too cold. It was absolutely, he was brilliant, but he was a maverick. Like he holds the world record for the fastest ever sending off, because he basically they were tell him to warm up. He didn't want to come on, and they finally coaxed him to go on. And because it's cold and he doesn't want to play, before they restart the game, because there's a free kick going on, he's headbutted the defender and got a straight red. So technically, he was sent off in 0.00 seconds.
I can't imagine he's still doing postman duties between June and August only in the Swansea area these days. Wow, and that's some high praise as well, because obviously as a team that had Lee Trundle, I mean he was known for apart from just being prolific, also some spectacular goals, wasn't there?
Well, Lee Trundle was, for my money, the most entertaining player we had, and then with Walter Boyd, he was just an out-and-out clinical striker. He needed half a chance and he'd score. But what was frustrating about him was, on average, he'd score 2 goals a match. But then also, on average, he'd refuse to play half the season. So it sort of levelled out.
Amazing. In 2005, the Swans moved from the much-loved Vetch Field, as we've already mentioned, to the Swansea City Stadium. Obviously, leaving a ground with so many memories, we've already touched on a few. It's a huge wrench for any fan base. How was that move greeted at the time, and how do you think fans feel about it kind of all these years on?
There are definitely fans that missed the Vetch Field. So I'm one of them. What it was about the Vetch Field was the fans had made it a difficult place to come and play. It could be as hostile as any stadium. It was the closeness of the stands, and it was, when it was a boiling point there, it was a difficult place to come. I think some fans were obviously delighted because it was taking the step up, and the Liberty is a beautiful stadium, and it would have had to have happened at some point. But yeah, I think hardcore Swansea City fans, if they remember the Vetch Field, will always say that the Vetch was better. Because now you go to the Liberty and no one's even standing up; everyone's sitting down, and the atmosphere has gone there. But the Liberty's done great things for us, but the Vetch will always be in my heart, 100%.
So the third game you're going to get on VHS is a Premier League game that doesn't feature Swansea at all. Which Premier League classic would you watch again and again? I'm
going back to 1996 for this, just because I've got incredible memories of some world-class players in the Premier League at that time. Like you looked at any team at that time, they had these, and this was the sort of time where there were more and more foreign players coming into the Premier League, and all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, who is this guy? He was just incredible. So I've gone for Liverpool beating Newcastle 4-3 that season.
Amazing. And that obviously is an absolute Premier League classic. I mean, immediately when I think about that, the whole game is incredible, but the Collymore goal, the camera shaking,
Yeah.
Keegan slumped over the board. In 1996, would you have been sat at home watching that on Sky? Would you have been down the pub? What would you do? You remember watching it live, or is it just kind of one of those games that's just lived forever? Because it's
No, I
watchable
watched it
now,
live.
tonight.
I watched it live. I can't remember where I watched it live, but my stepdad was a massive Liverpool fan. So I remember watching it live, and I remember I had a little look back earlier about to see the full goal scorers, because I remember Collymore scoring in the last minute, and you've got Ferdinand in there, Ginola, Fowler's got two. It was just oozing with quality, and from what I remember, there wasn't a bad goal in there. They were all great goals. It was just that was the typical two teams at their absolute top peak, where the teams they're bonded, they're creative, the players know each other, and they've both come out attacking. And for me, that's the best game. I enjoy high scoring games. I don't like games where they're overly tactical, they just cancel each other out. It bores me, so this was perfect for me.
The Premier League's in only about its fourth or fifth season when that game takes place. Football has undergone a massive transformation in that time. It's become box office more than ever before for a TV audience. That game, I think, has lived forever because it literally just had everything, didn't it? The drama, and also it had kind of followed this period of Newcastle's relatively sudden collapse.
Yeah,
I think that's just an all-time absolute classic.
Yeah, I agree. And also, at that time, I don't know what it was about Newcastle, but they seemed to be everyone's second favourite team as well, especially when they had Asprilla come in and Shearer up front. It was just incredible. And yeah, I've always had a soft spot for Newcastle, and I think it just comes from those early years watching them.
Going back to Swansea, after the narrow escape on the final day, Swansea spent 2 more seasons in the fourth tier, 3 in the third, 3 in the second, before a Scott Sinclair hat-trick at Wembley inspired a 4-2 win against Reading to make Brendan Rodgers' side become the first Welsh team to win promotion to the Premier League in that era. That must have been one hell of a decade to be a supporter. All those promotions, just constantly climbing up through the league ladder. What stands out for you during that time?
For me, it was the introduction of Roberto Martinez. Firstly, as a player, when he came into our midfield, for the first time since I can remember supporting Swans, we looked like we had someone who was a real class act in the middle of that field. He was head and shoulders above the rest. Then he went off, I believe he went to Wigan after that. And then he came back as a manager, player manager first and then manager. And once he was in full control, and he is responsible, well, it was him and Kenny Jackett just before, responsible for getting that team playing, which is now known as the Swansea way. He was a masterclass, Roberto Martinez. I always hold out hope that at some point he's going to come back to the club, because I think that's the fairy tale. If he came back and took us up again, it'd be incredible.
Yeah, and responsible for such a fantastic period, and obviously he's gone on to incredible things in terms of the roles that he's got. He isn't always universally loved by every club he's been at. I don't think Everton fans necessarily liked him as much, but Swansea's a place, because of that period, he'll always be welcome back at.
Yeah, and also, it was obviously Brendan Rodgers that took us up, and between Rodgers and Martinez we had Paulo Sousa. Sousa, to be fair to him, sorted out our defence. He gave us a more solid defence. But I do believe if Martinez hadn't got offered the job he did and left, he would have took us up 100%. It was we just missed out the season before. We had Jason Scotland, who was banging goals in for fun, and I think he actually made a mistake going to Wigan with Martinez because he wasn't up to it. But I think if Martinez had stayed with the squad we had, we would have gone up with him 100%.
Okay, so the fourth game we're going to give you to take with you is a European tie, a European club tie that you'd want to take with you. What have you gone for?
I've gone for, and I think maybe a few people might go for this because it's one of the all-time classics. I've gone for the Bayern Munich Manchester United Champions League final, the Solskjaer and Sheringham goals right at the end.
That is a popular choice, and what I love about this and what I find intriguing about it is that, to say the least, Man United don't tend to be lots of football fans' second team, but actually them winning the Champions League in 1999 is just remembered as a classic match. And I share that of watching it, almost being lifted from my seat and cheering from the sofa when those goals went in. What was your experience watching it? Well,
I remember, this is why it sticks in my mind. I was, obviously my stepdad was a Liverpool fan, so I wasn't watching that game downstairs. He didn't want to know, so I was upstairs. in my room. I remember watching the whole match, and if we're being honest, Manchester United didn't deserve to win that game. They were under pressure the whole match. I think Bayern Munich hit the woodwork twice after they scored the goal as well. And when that Sheringham goal went in, I remember jumping up and running downstairs to tell my stepdad they scored. And then by the time I got back upstairs, it was 2-1. I'd missed the second goal.
Wow. Because this as well, before the board was going up, I mean, it got to 90 minutes and it was at the referee's discretion. There was no 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes like we've seen in the World Cup. It was just when the whistle blows. So there was no... To get to 90 minutes 1-0 down and win a game 2-1 was almost unheard of anyway. To do
but that was Alex Ferguson all over though, wasn't it? It was. This is why I love it. It summarised that as Alex Ferguson up. So they're 1-0 down at one point. He had 4 strikers on. He had Solskjaer, Sheringham, York, and Cole. So and this is what annoys me about modern football sometimes. You watch matches. I do it with Swansea now. They'll be 1-0 down and they're not making any substitutions. I'm like, come on, you're losing anyway. You may as well just go for it. With Ferguson, that's what he did. He chucked 4 on and he gets that result. And also that Man United team at that time was a diluted team, wasn't it? Because they had suspensions of Scholes and Keane in the middle of the park. I think Beckham was playing in the middle of the park and Jesper Blomqvist was on the right wing. It was, that was not a Champions League winning team. It was incredible.
What a match, and fondly remembered by not just Manchester United fans, although perhaps not every Liverpool fan would have enjoyed it quite so much. Going back to Swansea, your first season in the Premier League, it's a fairly comfortable one. You finish 11th, 47 points, 11 points clear of the drop. It's just as comfortable the following season. You finished 9th. This time you add a League Cup to the trophy cabinet as well, becoming the first Welsh club to win the competition. How does that afternoon against Bradford City, watching your side win so comfortably at Wembley as well, because Bradford were, I think, in the 4th tier at the time and had done amazingly to get there, but obviously took a little bit of a thrashing on the day. I mean, could you have ever dreamed that this was possible a few years earlier?
Well, do you know what? It's weird, right? So dreaming of being in Europe with Michael Laudrup as your manager when we were in the trouble we were in a couple of years back, it's beyond belief. Like if someone had said to me, "Oh, I've seen the future. This is what's going to happen," I would have got them instantly sectioned and make sure they went near no psychedelics ever again. It was just incredible. On the day, even though it was Bradford, we're still Swansea and we still do stupid things. So there was no sort of full-gone conclusion that I'm like, yeah, we're going to win this. I'm like, anything could happen. But the win was comfortable in the end. And then, oh my God, to go into Europe with the squad that we had as well. I mean, we had some incredible players. We had Pablo Hernandez, we had Wilfred Boney up front, who before his injuries was as good as anyone I'd seen. Like, he was just. I was actually disappointed when he went to Man City and got the injuries, because I think he got malaria first and a few injuries. Because I think a fit Wilfred Boney could have been a regular in that Man City team. We were just brilliant. We had we had a young players on the outskirts. We had a Spanish guy called Alessandro Pozuelo who hardly played for us, but when he came on, he was a magician. And what Michael Laudrup did with that, the signings he made, for me, that was peak Swansea. On our day with that team, we could have beat anyone. And this was the thing about being a Swansea fan. When we were at that point, it didn't matter who we played in the Premier League or in Europe. We were like, yeah, we got a chance here. It was crazy to feel like that, because before we were used to not even knowing if we had enough players to put on the pitch. It was crazy.
If someone's posty round went on too long, you were short on the bench. The 5th match to take with you is an international game you'd relive forever. What have you gone for? I've
gone for the 1998 World Cup final between France and Brazil, with France winning 3-0. I love this game purely because you look at each side just oozing with absolute class players. It reminds me of the first days of playing Football Manager, or the old games that used to come out on the PlayStation, like Kevin Keegan's Player Manager or something like that. These were the players that you would just go and sign straight away, like your Desai's, your Leboeuf. I think Lizarazu was in there, and then you've got the Brazilians. You had Cafu, Dida. You had the main man Ronaldo up front. Rivaldo was there. It was just oozing with class. And what I liked about it was there was that whole debacle around Ronaldo because he'd had a seizure the night before, and so they said, look, you've got to play to give him medication, and he went out and he wasn't right. And I always wonder about that game because they obviously built that team around Ronaldo, so they played with a pinnacle of an unwell man, basically. And I think that's why it ended up 3-0 France, although France were a world-class side. I just wonder if Ronaldo had been fully fit, that might have been a different game. But also if they'd been brave enough to put Ronaldo on the bench and just say, look, we're going to start someone else.
The guy who got pulled out of the team at the last moment, he was starting in a World Cup final and then he wasn't.
Oh, Edmundo?
That's the one, yes.
Absolute nothing of a man. He got a monkey drunk in his wedding as well. There's a picture of him at his wedding with a monkey, and the monkey got drunk, he got in trouble. He was crazy, but he was world class.
Yeah, well, he could have made all the difference. That was one of those matches you just don't forget. And I think that World Cup, it was a fantastic World Cup, and those scenes on the Champs-Elysees of all the French celebrating that first World Cup win. And the other thing that sticks out to me for there, I don't know if you remember, I think it was the BBC One coverage of Des Lynam reading out the Rudyard Kipling poem with kind of one of these, the BBC montage they do. Absolutely fantastic. If you've never seen that, well worth going and finding on YouTube. If you remember France '98, what a way to end the entire tournament that was.
It was one of my favourite World Cups. That was the World Cup where Jamaica turned up for the only time, I believe, and I mean they've been since. And obviously that was my introduction to Walter Boyd, and then a year after he just Swans. It was brilliant.
The League Cup win for Swansea takes you into the Europa League. You win through a couple of qualifying rounds, record a famous win at the Mestalla in the group stages against Valencia before falling in the round of 32 to Napoli. What was it like seeing Swansea competing in European football?
It was incredible. It was one of those moments where every single game you had to sort of pinch yourself and you're like, I can't believe I'm actually watching not only us playing in European football, but actually competing as well. Beating Valencia 3-0, we beat Valencia that night, and it was, I think Wilfred Boney got 2. It was Hernandez got the other, I believe, and it was just insane. Like 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, I'm watching Valencia in the Champions League, and I could never imagine we'd go and give them a game, never mind beat them. It was amazing, and also, we went out to Napoli in the end, and even that was close. And I do wonder sometimes. I look back and I wonder how far we could have gone if we'd had a bit of luck in that Napoli game, because we had the squad, we had the manager. It's crazy to think that Swans could have been competing for what do they call it, where the winner of the Europa League plays the winner of the Champions League.
The Super Cup, Swansea in the Super Cup.
That would have been incredible. Like if that had happened, I would have probably convinced myself that I was in some sort of simulation and I'd actually been playing Football Manager too long and I'd got somehow sucked into the screen. Like it was insane.
At some point, someone's going to tell you it's time for school. Yeah, amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, the sixth match to take with you is any game before the Premier League era that you'd go back and watch over and over. What have you gone for?
Yeah, so this is one that I was too young to watch. It was one that my dad told me about. It was in 1981, and it was Swansea City's first game in the First Division after John Toshak had taken us up basically from the bottom division all the way up. His tactics were brilliant. He was using sort of reserve players from Liverpool that didn't quite make it, or players that had made it and now they were on their way down. We turned out the First Division. Everyone thought we were going to be the Whitton boys out of the division, and we beat Leeds 5-1 on the first game. And I remember Bob Latchford, who's a Swansea legend, scores a hat-trick. We've got Jeremy Charles, who was John Charles' brother, who was probably the best player in the world at that point. He's got one. And then Alan Curtis, who is still with the club now. I think he's our loans manager now. Absolute. Every time we lose a manager, Alan Curtis steps in as our manager, and he got the goal as well. And I've watched the highlights of the game. We were incredible. It's such a brilliant match to watch.
And then again, that kind of grainy footage of the Vetch Field in the 80s. I mean, that these are the matches again that people. It's why stadiums live forever, isn't it? Days like that, the stories are passed down all those years on. Yeah,
absolutely. And it's crazy. You see the footage now, and it always amazes me how people got out of those stadiums alive sometimes. Because you look at especially footage of the North Bank. I I'm pretty sure the North Bank is only supposed to have 2,000 in. There's easily 7,000 people in that stand, just squashed in. Yeah. It was great. I remember going in for an FA Cup game, and it was obviously full capacity. Now, my dad had bought tickets off someone on the street because we couldn't get tickets. And one was for the East stand, one was for the North stand. And we go over both tickets, and my dad just says to the guy, he goes, can we both go in the North stand? So I'm with my boy. And the steward just looks at him, he goes, the thing is, we're at full capacity. And my dad goes, well, is that a no? He goes, no, go on. Just straight in.
That counts as a risk assessment in in that period of football. So, after 2 comfortable seasons and a European adventure in the Premier League, Swansea finished 12th, 8th and 12th again. So, it takes a 5-game unbeaten run at the end of their 6th season to lift them from the relegation place into 15th. But their Premier League stay ends in 2017-18. Downward curve in those final couple of seasons. They fail to win any of their final 8 games, fall into the bottom 3 in the final few games as well and go down. Clearly, Swans fans have endured worse. But what was that feeling of relegation like, and what do you put that period of stability kind of come to a bit of an end? What does it come down to?
Yeah, it was horrible to see. The worst thing about it was you could see from an outside point of view, it was avoidable. There were some really bad decisions made in the club at that time. The main decision was selling the club to the American owners that have it at the moment. They're not from the city. They treat it like a business. It's all about making money for them. And you've seen it with a few other clubs. Once you don't have the ownership in place, you're going to be struggling. And then it was recruitment. Recruitment was absolutely awful. We were selling big players, taking the profit, replacing them with players who weren't up to the job. And management, we went from Loudrop, and then they gave the next job to Gary Monk, who was a player manager at that time, never managed a club in his life. And I just can't see how he can make that decision to go from a world-class manager to someone who's never done it. And he started well, but that was only because he had Loudrop's squad with him. That was the only reason. Once those players started leaving, we started a demise. And then, from there, we just had some absolute disastrous choices. Francesco Guidlin, Italian, came in. He was decent. He kept us up. He did his job. And then the next season, where they could have brought Brendan Rodgers back, they decided to give him a contract for a year. And then after, I believe it was 6 games, they got rid of him and brought Bob Bradley in, which was, for me, that's the worst era of Swansea City I've ever seen. Just because, I've seen some bad Swansea sides, but the fact that we still had world-class players and we were playing that bad just made it even worse for me. It was all about recruitment. It was absolutely terrible. And by the time that Paul Clement came in, he lifted us a little bit. He could only do so much, and then I believe it was Carvalho that took us down. And again, a good manager, but he was left with the bare bones. And there's only so much you can do if by the time you go into a team that's already full of championship players, then you're only going to the championship.
Brendan Rodgers, I imagine is held in very high esteem still with the fan base. Bob Bradley, there have been further American managers who've come to the Premier League and done a little bit better, but for Bob Bradley, it just didn't work.
It was terrible. He was, again, to be fair to Bob Bradley, he didn't inherit a good squad, but his tactics were just off. I understand the leagues that he played in, you could get away with this philosophy of all-out attack, just score more goals than the opposition. But when you're in the Premier League, you're playing against better defences and you're going to get caught on the break more often. And that's what you saw time and time again. And he was trying to be too clever for his own good, trying to play players out of position. And it just didn't work for him at all. The worst manager I've seen at the Swans, and that's including we had a manager that stayed a day. It was Mickey Adams. Mickey Adams came into the club. I can't remember when it was. He said, right, this is what I want. I need this. They said no, so he left, and he was our manager for one day. It was crazy.
Wow, yeah, some record. So we're going to now give you the opportunity to choose a current or former Premier League player to attempt a rescue mission from the island. Now, do be warned, there is a caveat. If the mission fails, you do have to see out your days with this footballer. With all of that in mind, who would you choose?
I'm sort of split with this one. So in terms of person that I believe could pull off the rescue mission, for me, it's Matt Le Tissier. Matt Le Tissier is probably my favourite all-time Premier League midfielder. he was absolute. He was a magician. I feel like it wouldn't matter what the mission was. If I said to Matt Letizia, you've basically got to make a spaceship out of these palm trees. I think he could do it, because the things that I saw him do with a ball on the field, and for Southampton as well. Like Southampton were rubbish for so long, and he was just incredible in that midfield. So he's the one I'd like to rescue, and I think I probably could spend time with him. But I think if I knew it was going to fail, and I 100% knew I had to spend time with someone, I'm going Jimmy Bullard, 100%.
So, yeah, I mean, that Jimmy Bullard would be an excellent kind of island mate to see out your days with. Possibly, I think the conversation would be a little bit lighter than Matt Letizier's.
Yeah, absolutely, mate, yeah.
So okay, all right. So I'm not sure. I think you've got more chance with Matt Letizia actually managing the rescue mission. I'm not sure Bullard's going to be able to actually get you out of there. But if I push you, who you going for? Who would be the one?
I'm going to go Matt Letizia, because I just think there's a good chance of him completing the rescue mission.
One of the most remarkable stories of Swansea's rise to the Premier League is the story of Leon Britton. He played against Hull City while on loan from West Ham in that deciding game, and was player of the year in 2002-03 for you. He briefly left for Sheffield United, a decision he later called a mistake, before returning to help guide you to promotion, lift a League Cup and play in Europe. He made 149 top-flight appearances. While there were no goals and just one assist, he was famously labelled the pass master of all of Europe, with a pass completion rate of 93.3%, putting him above Scholes, Carrick, Yaya Toure and the entire Barcelona midfield that season. It's worth adding that Joe Allen was 10th on that same list, just behind Sergio Busquets. Does the label club legend do Leon Britton justice at Swansea?
Absolutely not. I think we should rename the stadium the Leon Britton Stadium. He was absolutely incredible for us for what he did when he first came in. I think he was 17 years old when he came to us on loan, and he was a winger because he had a bit of pace. I remember he was out on the wing, but even then he was going past players. He never misplaced a pass. He was essential in that season to keeping us up, and then what he's done for us since is just incredible. When he left for Sheffield United, I don't know what it was about the club, and maybe it's the role that he was playing in, but it wasn't really sort of ticking for him. It wasn't working. And I remember the first game he came back, it was like we had our engine back in the middle in the midfield. He was so important. He's created so many chances for us. It's unbelievable. I'd love to know exactly how many goals were scored by Swansea in that time period from an assist from Leon Britton. It's probably astounding.
There aren't many sides who go literally from the fourth tier all the way up to the Premier League to go into Europe to win a trophy. That's rare enough. To then have a player that pretty much goes on that entire journey with you. I mean, it is Roy of the Rovers stuff, isn't it?
It's crazy. The only one I can remember that happening was with they didn't win a trophy, but when Nick Barmby left Liverpool and went back to his boyhood club Hull, and they were in the lower division, and he ended up then playing in the Premier League with them. He took them all away, and I love that. I love that story of people going back to their clubs to help out like that. But yeah, the Leon Britton was, and I actually think Leon Britton retired a bit too soon as well, because he was retiring at the end of the Premier League season, and I think he probably could have done a job for us in the Championship for a few years as well.
I'm going to give you the chance now to delete a game from the history books by putting it in room 101. It can be a Swansea game, a match for your rivals, something obscure. What game would you get rid of forevermore?
To be honest, I'd like to get rid of the entire Bob Bradley era, but I know I'm not allowed, so I'm going to go for one game in particular there. And it's actually a game that we won. We beat Crystal Palace in the Premier League 5-4. Incredible scenes. Fernando Llorente scored 2 late goals at one equaliser and then the winner. And it was a brilliant game. It was typical Bob Bradley trying to outscore them. Lucky enough, Crystal Palace were as bad as us that day. But the reason I'd like to delete that is because after that, Bob Bradley was getting a bit overconfident, a bit sort of cocky, and that one game probably kept him in his job for a month longer than he needed to be. So I think it was just that I would have happily have been hammered 5-0 in that game and Bob Bradley gone sooner. And it might have been a different story going forward, because I don't know what managers were available at that time. I'd like to get rid of that game just to get Bob Bradley up the door a bit sooner.
I love the idea that just out of shot is a dartboard with Bob Bradley's face on, just in your room. So we talked a lot today about Swansea's rise through the divisions. As we record this, they're on the edge of the playoffs of the Championship. It's very competitive at the moment in that division. There's been a couple of unsuccessful playoff campaigns against Brentford in the 4 seasons outside of the top flight since you were relegated. Is it a matter of time until Swansea are back in the Premier League? And again, to cover that point we talked about earlier, do you want them there, or is the Championship a more enjoyable place to watch your football?
I'd like to see us back in the Premier League. I would like it to be in a few years' time when we've got a better squad. I wouldn't like to come up with the squad that we have at the moment. I'm not too sure about the manager that we got at the moment as well. He's got, to be fair to him, he's got big boots to fill, because we had Graham Potter and then we had Steve Cooper. So both, they're showing now that Steve Cooper and Potter, they're tactician masters. They're brilliant managers. Again, both of them didn't have the squads that they deserved. The board didn't back them. And with Russell Martin, he's not got the squad, but I do think I just don't think he's up to the job. I think he's a little bit too new in his managerial career. He's a bit tactically naive, especially when it comes to defence. There's so many games this season we could have won comfortably if we just shut up shop at the end, and he doesn't seem to do it. So I think it is a case we will be there. I don't think it's with Russell Martin. I think if we get the next manager selection correct, and we get another Graham Potter-ish manager or someone like Cooper, and the boards are sensible enough to actually pay a bit of money into the squad because they know that it's worth the money going up, then I think we will be there. But a lot's got to change before then, definitely.
Steve Cooper's a really interesting one, isn't it? Because obviously he came really close with you, and then he has now taken Forest into the Premier League. Was that, in retrospect, maybe not the right decision, or was it time for him to leave? I imagine he's someone who would be welcome back.
I'd love him back. I believe they said it was a mutual decision. So I think that he had enough of the board not backing him because there was a few incidents where they sold players behind his back, and he'd found out the morning of training. So there was a lot going on at the club. Also, I feel like for him, if he had stayed for a bit longer without the board's back, and he might have tarnished his reputation because he'd done everything he could. I think he knew he could take a team up if he had the backing, and he proved it at Forest. He went there. They were in the relegation zone. He's took them up. My friend, another comedian, a guy Paul B. Edwards, is like a massive Forest fan, and he adores Steve Cooper. He can't believe what he's done for the club. So I would happily have Steve Cooper back at the club on the premise that we had a bit of money for him to spend, and the club was looked after properly. Because I do believe that he is not only a manager that can take us up, but I think he's a manager that over time can compete for mid-table in the Premier League as well.
Well, who knows what the future holds. Okay, well, that just about brings us to the end of your Deserted Island. Before we let you go, Simon, one of our regular features is to put a Premier League player, past or present, into the League of Nations Hall of Fame. We're working our way through the early letters of the alphabet, and you would be tasked with Armenia, would it not be, for only one Armenian player to have appeared, which is Henrik Mkhitaryan. So he becomes Armenia's representative straight off the bat. Instead, I'd like your help choosing the greatest Australian of the Premier League era. Now, I've narrowed them down to a shortlist for you. It's a shortlist of 4, and we'll put it out on Twitter for a vote. Before I take you through them, here's a few that were perhaps unlucky not to make this list. So, the players that didn't make the list is John Aloisi, with 10 goals in 42 appearances for Coventry City. He did also score 27 times in 55 caps for Australia too. Stan Lazaridis, with 4 seasons under his belt for West Ham in the late 90s, before returning for another 4 seasons with Birmingham in 2002. There's Brett Emerton and Lucas Neal, who swapped Australia for Blackburn with over 500 appearances between them and almost 200 caps too. And Aaron Moy, a huge player in Huddersfield's 2-season stay in the top flight before moving to the South Coast with Brighton. If his career after football doesn't involve opening a Thai restaurant called Straight to What with A Moy, he is, quite frankly, missing a trick for me. Now, there's also Mark Bosnich, the original successor to Peter Schmeichel, one of the least successful as well. Fergie later called the free transfer signing as bad piece of business, although he did get a league winner's medal for his first season at Old Trafford and spent 7 solid seasons between the sticks at Villa. I mean, is there any of those players I've mentioned that kind of you have particular fond memories of? There's 1 or 2 90s legends there, I think, in kind of Bosnich, Aloisi. You might have come across him even in the lower divisions with Swansea. Any of those Australian players you remember fondly?
I remember Stan Lazaridis more at Birmingham than West Ham. I thought he was a brilliant player. He was a class act in the midfield. I thought he was, and also Bosnich. He's so disappointed, isn't it? Because you would have thought on paper when he came in to replace Schmeichel and what Bosnich had already done at Aston Villa, you were like, I think this is the natural replacement. And well, it went terribly wrong. I believe he failed the drug test in the end, didn't he? When he went to Chelsea, got banned for a while, and then that's just catapulted Manchester United into that hilarious stage where they seemed like they had a different goalkeeper every single week. I think Andy Gorman was there at one point, wasn't
he? Yeah, I think he was. Yeah, as a squad player, and they just, I mean, obviously Schmeichel, the big gloves to fill, to say the least. But it really took him a long while until Van der Sar came in. I think was probably the one. But I mean, yeah, on paper, Bosnich would have looked like a solid choice. So.
I find it crazy how they took so long to sign Van der Sar. I thought, like, if you're looking at the Premier League at that time, Van der Sar at Fulham was clearly the player that they should have gone for. And if we're honest, Van der Sar should not have been playing for Fulham at that point. I think he gone from Juventus to Fulham. He was still world class. And I'm surprised that the scouting team didn't say this is the man, because when he did come in, he was a little bit older, but he still had a good few years there, didn't he?
Yeah, okay, so here is your shortlist of the 4 Australian players that one of them belongs in the Premier League of Nations Hall of Fame. We've got Tim Cahill, long considered to be one of the best players outside the top flight during his time at Millwall. Cahill signed for Everton for $1.5 million in 2004. By 2006, he was on the 50-man shortlist for the Ballon d'Or, and he became the first Everton player to score on 3 different occasions at Anfield since Dixie Dean. He'd score there on a couple more occasions before leaving for New York Red Bulls in 2012 after 226 Premier League appearances and 56 goals. Also on our shortlist, Mark Viduka, the man who scored 92 goals in 240 appearances for Leeds, Middlesbrough and Newcastle. He once scored all 4 goals at Ellen Road in a 4-3 win over Liverpool, helped guide Middlesbrough to a UEFA Cup final and played for Australia at the World Cup in 2006. He does have a surprisingly poor record for his national side though, scoring 11 times in 43 appearances. Or is it Viduka's Ellen Road teammate, Harry Kewell, who appeared in 13 of the Premier League's first 17 seasons for Leeds and Liverpool? The PFA Young Player of the Year in 1999-2000, he was the subject of a £25 million bid from Inter Milan, but stayed at Leeds to be a key part of the side that reached the Champions League semi-finals a year later. He remains the only Australian to win a Champions League medal, doing so with Liverpool in 2005, although he was jeered off the pitch by his own supporters in that game after being accused of feigning injury in the 23rd minute. Or is it Mark Schwarzer, who made over 500 appearances for Middlesbrough and Fulham between 1997 and 2013. He was a losing finalist in the UEFA Cup and Europa League finals for both those teams. He added another 10 Premier League appearances in the final 4 seasons of his 20, although none of them came in his time as backup goalkeeper for 2015 champions Chelsea or 2016 champions Leicester. So he was in 2 title-winning squads in consecutive years without making an appearance. He's both Chelsea and Leicester's oldest ever player in the Premier League and the oldest player to ever make their Champions League debut at 41 years and 65 days old for Chelsea in a 1-0 win against Steaua Bucharest. So, Simon, out of that selection, we've got Kewell, Viduka, Cahill and Schwarzer. Who do you think is the greatest Australian to wear the Premier League badge on their arm?
For me, this was a tough decision because I absolutely love Mark Viduka. I thought Mark Viduka was, for when Mark Viduka was playing, he was exactly what you needed for a number 9. He was that player up front who was strong. He could bully opponents. If you put the ball in the air, he'd be on the end of it. But also, which was unusual for a player like that, he had great feet. He was so skillful. He had half a chance and he'd get a goal. So I love Viduka, but for me, it's Harry Kewell. Harry Kewell was a wizard at Leeds. He was absolutely brilliant. Never really lived up to it at Liverpool. I don't think he had a great Liverpool career, but he wasn't the man he was at Leeds. But for me, Kewell, what he could do on the pitch, I would believe that Viduka probably scored a lot of his goals for Leeds because he had Kewell setting them up the way he did. And Kewell, even if he was on sometimes he'd play out on the wing, even if he was in the centre, he'd always get that decisive pass. He was just brilliant. And the fact that he didn't go to Inter Milan at that time, when Inter Milan were, I believe Inter Milan at that time had Baggio was there, they had Trebo West, I think Ronaldo was up front. It was just an insane side. And for him to turn that down to stay at Leeds, that for me, that's what football's about. You find a club that works for you, and you know that the way they play suits your play. And he obviously, who was the manager at the time? Was it David O'Leary?
Yeah, it would be, yeah.
So yeah, he's obviously got that connection with David O'Leary, knows his tactics, knows that he might not find that somewhere else. He's like, no, I'm going to stick at the club. And Leeds were class at that time. They were absolutely brilliant. I remember them what they did in Europe. It was the same when Swans were in Europe, beating teams you never expect them to beat. Alan Smith up front was on fire. I remember Michael Bridges as well, who hardly played, but every time he did seem to score goals. He was just brilliant. And I remember Lucas Radaby being there. He was more defensive, but there was a midfield partnership, and I can't remember who it was, and they were inspirational. So that whole team with Kewell pulling the strings was brilliant. So I'm going to go Harry Kewell.
And just a word about Mark Schwarzer, because I just mentioned, UEFA Cup final, Europa League finals with Middlesbrough, with Fulham, and they were probably. We talked about that moment of it. Had Swansea gone all the way, that's the kind of comparable side, isn't it, of sides that maybe weren't year in year out in Europe, but had fantastic runs in Europe when they were in there, and quite surprising that Schwarzer, obviously squad member at Chelsea, squad member at Leicester in 15 and in 16 when both those titles were won. So presumably an influence in the dressing room as well. He seems like quite a grounded guy.
Yeah, great goalkeeper as well. If you, even later on in his career, if you needed a backup goalkeeper, who's better than him to be sitting on the bench? And when he comes on, he's a solid pair of hands as well.
Okay, the final question we're going to ask you. We're going to give you a football to take to your deserted island and task you with recreating an iconic Premier League goal to see out your days. Which Premier League goal would you relive forever with palm trees for goalposts?
It's a goal that I know if I try and recreate it a million times, I'm still not going to do it. But I suppose I'd have fun on the island trying to do it. At least it'd keep me busy. And it's, again, Matt Le Tissier. It's the goal that he scored in 1993 against Newcastle. So he scored 2 goals in that match. And he'd been out with the team for a while before, so he had something to prove to the manager. And he comes on, and the first goal he scores is the one where he catches the ball almost just cooped in by the ankle, chips it up and volleys it with the other foot, and that's brilliant. But the one that I love is when he's already on the run and the ball's come over the top. He's caught it on the back of his heel, taken one touch here. The next touch, he's flicked it over the defender's head. This defender's come out. The third touch has taken it round there, and it's still in the air. And the moment you think he's going to blast it, he just passes it into the bottom corner. It was genius. One of the best goals I've ever seen.
A really iconic Premier League goal. And if we're going to give you a football, if the rescue mission doesn't come off, who better to teach you the technique than the man himself who you're going to be stuck on the island with? So, what we'd have to do is maybe build defenders out of coconuts. And some people would say, well, that's crazy because they're standstill defenders. But actually, in that goal, the defenders were standing still. They didn't know where to go. They didn't know what to do with that. It was brilliant. Yeah, no, it's an amazing goal. And as you say, it's actually a really, considered placed finish after the insane skill to get himself into that position.
Yeah.
Okay, Simon, that brings to an end the show. Thank you so much for joining me today and sharing this. Where can people find you online? Obviously, you're a stand-up comedian. You're all over the country. Where can people sort of find you online?
Be honest, I'm awful on Twitter. I keep getting told off by my agent to do more. So the best place is Simon Emanuel Comedian on Facebook. All my dates are listed on there.
Thank you very much, mate. Really good to chat to you, and see you soon.
Yeah, take care, mate.
So that was Simon Emanuel, a lovely guy, and I thought he really encapsulated Swansea's journey from the depths of the 4th tier and very near extinction all the way up to Europe and Wembley. What a story, what a ride those Swansea fans have been on. And Simon, he talks about the positives and the negatives of that entire journey. He loved watching Swansea when they were in the lower reaches of the Football League. He loved going to the Vetch, has the Liberty Stadium, has those trips into Europe. Does it match up? I don't know. You can maybe make your own mind up. But a really, really interesting chat. And I enjoyed spending that time with Simon, chatting all things Swansea City. We also chatted who the greatest Australian Premier League player is. You heard what Simon thought. That is now available on Twitter for you to go and vote for, or at least it will be very, very shortly. You've got to be really quick off the mark for it not to be there. At WFBA Pod is where you can go and place that vote in the week after this show goes out. And speaking of which, our greatest Barbadian was decided with a vote last week. And the Wigan fans were out in force again. It was Emerson Boyce with a huge 84% of the vote. Emerson Boyce is your greatest Barbadian. No surprise there, to be honest. Nick Blackman was our runner-up ahead of Gregory Goodridge and Paul Eiffel. So congratulations, Emerson. You're in the When Football Began Again Premier League of Nations Hall of Fame. I'm going to have to come up with a snappier title for that at some point. Now, as I mentioned at the start of the show, this is episode 12 of When Football Began Again. Most podcasts end after 12 episodes. 12 is the average length a podcast gets to before the host just gives it up as a bad job, apparently. I have plenty more in the can. I have many, many more episodes in me. If you can continue to support the show, I would really appreciate it. The numbers are growing week on week. We reached 120 in the Apple football charts this week. I think that's the highest we've been, and that was helped by all of the downloads, but also your reviews. Please, please, if you can, go and leave a 5-star review for the show, especially on Apple, but quite frankly, wherever you get your podcasts. Or if you're watching this on YouTube, subscribe, hit like, leave a comment. All of those things that I know people feel a bit icky about help me find new audience. I'd really appreciate it if you could help me out with that. So please leave a review, share it with someone you know, download all the episodes, do whatever you can and help me keep climbing those charts, finding new people. I've made it to episode 12. Let's hope episode 13 comes next week. It definitely is. Don't worry. And so this week's show, we've had a team that played in all 4 divisions during the Premier League era. Next week, I have a player who scored in all 4 divisions. Ashley Ward, the former Norwich, Derby, Barnsley, Blackburn, Bradford City, among others. He is on the show. He lives in Dubai now. He's living a pretty decent life. He's doing very well for himself after football. There's plenty of that. Plus his memories of his playing career, his experience of playing in the Premier League, those big money moves that he made. He was a cult hero pretty much every club he played at. He had a real knack for scoring important goals. We talk about that and much more. Lovely guy, really, really enjoyable chat. I highly recommend that one. If you support one of the teams that Ashley Ward played for, you're definitely going to want to listen in. But quite frankly, I just think he's just such a nice, charming company for an hour. I'll be back next week. Ashley Ward, thank you for listening. See you then.
Thanks for listening to When Football Began Again. Join us again next time for another slice of Premier League nostalgia. In the meantime, subscribe, leave us a 5-star review, find us on socials, and spread the word with all your Premier League loving mates.